In 1972, Arthur Miller bought a three-bedroom house in Levittown, New York for $18,000 while earning $9,000 a year driving a delivery truck. He had no degree, a modest savings account, and a firm belief that his children would do better than him. In 2024, his grandson, Leo, a software engineer with a master's degree earning $95,000, sat in a cramped 400-square-foot studio apartment in Brooklyn, staring at a mortgage calculator. To buy that same house today, he would need a $150,000 down payment and a credit score that bordered on divinity. The American dream didn't just die, it was priced out of existence. The story of the American dream was never just about money, it was about the social contract. After World War II, the United States entered an era of unprecedented growth. For the greatest generation and the early baby boomers, the formula was simple. Work 40 hours a week, play by the rules, and the system will take care of you. Arthur Miller represented that peak. When he walked into a local bank in the 70s, the manager knew his name. Interest rates were manageable, and the Goldilocks economy meant that inflation was low enough for a single income to support a family of 5, 2 cars, and a yearly vacation to the Jersey Shore. Education back then was a ladder, not a trap. If Arthur wanted to go to college, he could have worked a summer job at a grocery store and paid his entire semester's tuition. There was a sense of linear progress. You started at the bottom, moved to the middle, and stayed there comfortably until you retired with a gold watch and a guaranteed pension. But as Leo looks back at his grandfather's life, it feels like a fairy tale. The greatest generation handed down a map to their children, but by the time the Millennials and Gen Z reached the trailhead, the terrain had been hit by a landslide. Leo followed the script. Every teacher, counselor, and adult in his life told him the same thing. If you want to survive, you need a degree. So he went. He chose a reputable university, studied late into the night, and walked across the stage in a cap and gown. But as he grasped that expensive piece of paper, he felt the weight of a $70,000 invisible anchor around his neck. In Arthur's day, a college degree was a luxury that led to a high-paying executive job. Today, it is a basic requirement for an entry-level position that barely pays enough to cover the interest on the loans used to get the degree. This is where the American dream turned into a debt trap. According to the Federal Reserve, student loan debt in the U.S. has skyrocketed to over $1.7 trillion. For millions of young Americans, their first adult act isn't buying a car or starting a family. It's signing away 20% of their future paycheck for the next 25 years. Leo watched his peers postpone their lives. They weren't buying starter homes because they were busy paying off starter educations. The math was cold and unforgiving. When your debt-to-income ratio is skewed before you even start your first job, the upward mobility the dream promised becomes a stationary crawl. If the debt was the anchor, the housing market was the wall. In the 1950s and 60s, the U.S. government subsidized the suburbs. For someone like Arthur, a house was a utility, a place to raise a family. But somewhere in the last 30 years, housing shifted from a utility to an investment vehicle. Institutional investors and private equity firms began buying up single-family homes by the thousands, turning the American neighborhood into a corporate portfolio. For Leo, looking for a house in the suburbs wasn't a competition against another young couple. It was a bidding war against a billion-dollar hedge fund that could pay in cash. In 1970, the median house price was roughly 3 times the median household income. By 2024, in many desirable American cities, that ratio had climbed to 7 or 8 times the median income. Leo realized that even with his $95,000 salary, a figure that would have made his grandfather a wealthy man, he was house poor. He lived in a world of the forever renters. The dream of the white picket fence wasn't just fading, it was being rented back to his generation at a premium.
This isn't just an economic story, it's a psychological one. The modern American youth lives in a state of hyper-competition. Arthur worked his shift and came home. The TV had 3 channels, and when the sun went down, the world went quiet. Leo, however, is tethered to his work 24/7 via a glowing screen in his pocket. He is told he must have a side hustle, an online brand, and a grind mindset. The psychological American dream has shifted from stability to survival. There is a haunting sense of relative deprivation. Through the lens of social media, young Americans see a curated world of extreme wealth, making their middle-class struggle feel like a personal failure rather than a systemic flaw. The result? Record levels of anxiety and a declining birth rate. Why start a family when you can barely afford yourself? Why believe in a system that demands more effort for fewer rewards?
The fall of the American dream is a reality of numbers, but the rise of something new might be on the horizon. Young Americans are beginning to reject the old metrics of success. You see it in the quiet quitting movement, the rise of remote work, and a renewed interest in labor unions. They are realizing that if the old dream, the house, the lawn, the 2.5 kids, is mathematically impossible, they must invent a new one. Leo recently visited his grandfather. Arthur, now in his 90s, looked around Leo's small apartment and asked, "When are you going to buy a real place, son?" Leo smiled, a bit sadly. "Grandpa, I'm not playing the same game you were. The rules changed while I was in the locker room." The American dream was a 20th century masterpiece built on unique post-war conditions that no longer exist. To the youth of today, the fall isn't a tragedy they caused, it's a landscape they inherited. The question isn't whether the dream will return, but what they will build in its ruins.